Aphorism 48, Part 1 of Book 2 of the New Organon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. The New Organon by Francis Bacon. Translated by James Spedding, Robert Leslie Ellis, and Douglas Denon Heath. Aphorism 48, Part 1 of Book 2. 48. Among prerogative instances, I will put in the 24th place instances of strife, which I also call instances of predominance. These indicate the mutual predominance and subjection of virtues, which of them is stronger and prevails, which of them is weaker and gives way. For the motions and efforts of bodies are compounded, decomposed, and complicated, no less than the bodies themselves. I will therefore first propound the principal kinds of motions or active virtues, in order that we may be able more clearly to compare them together in point of strength, and thereby to point out and designate more clearly the instances of strife and predominance. Let the first motion be that motion of resistance in matter which is inherent in each several portion of it, and in virtue of which it absolutely refuses to be annihilated, so that no fire, no weight or pressure, no violence, no length of time can reduce any portion of matter, be it ever so small, to nothing, but it will ever be something and occupy some space, and, to whatever straits it may be brought, will free itself by changing either its form or its place, or if this may not be, will subsist as it is, and will never come to such a pass as to be either nothing or nowhere. This motion the schoolmen, who almost always name and define things rather by effects and incapacities than by inner causes, either denote by the axiom, two bodies cannot be in one place, or call the motion to prevent penetration of dimensions. Of this motion it is unnecessary to give examples, as it is inherent in every body. Let the second motion be what I call motion of connection, by which bodies do not suffer themselves to be separated at any point from contact with another body, as delighting in mutual connection and contact. This motion the schoolmen call motion to prevent a vacuum, as when water is drawn up by suction or in a pump, the flesh by cupping glasses, or when water stops without running out in a perforated jar unless the mouth of the jar be opened to let in the air, and in numberless instances of a similar kind. Let the third motion be what I call motion of liberty, by which bodies strive to escape from their preternatural pressure or tension and to restore themselves to the dimensions suitable to their nature. Of this motion also we have innumerable examples, such as, to speak first of escape from pressure, the motion of water in swimming, of air in flying, of water in rowing, of air in the undulations of winds, of a spring in clocks. Of which we have also a pretty instance in the motion of the air compressed in children's popguns, when they hollow out an alder twig or some such thing and stuff it up at both ends with a piece of pulpy root or the like, and then with a ramrod thrust one of the roots, or whatever the stuffing be, towards the other hole, from which the root at the further end is discharged with a report, and that before it is touched by the nearer root or the ramrod. As for bodies escaping from tension, this motion displays itself in air remaining in glass eggs after suction, in strings, in leather and in cloth, which recoil after tension, unless it has gained too great strength by continuance, and in similar phenomena. This motion the schoolmen refer to under the name of motion in accordance with the form of the element, an injudicious name enough, since it is a motion which belongs not only to fire, air, and water, but to every variety of solid substance, as wood, iron, lead, cloth, parchment, etc., each of which bodies has its own proper limit of dimension, out of which it cannot easily be drawn to any considerable extent. But since this motion of liberty is of all the most obvious, and is of infinite application, it would be a wise thing to distinguish it well and clearly. For some very carelessly confuse this motion with the two former motions of resistance and connection, the motion, that is, of escape from pressure, with the motion of resistance, of escape from tension, with the motion of connection. Just as if bodies when compressed yield or expand, that there may not ensue penetration of dimensions, and when stretched recoil and contract, that there may not ensue a vacuum. Whereas if air when compressed had a mind to contract itself to the density of water, or wood to the density of stone, there would be no necessity for penetration of dimensions. Yet there might be a far greater compression of these bodies than they ever do actually sustain. In the same way, if water had a mind to expand to the rarity of air, or stone to the rarity of wood, there would be no need for a vacuum to ensue. And yet there might be effected a far greater extension of these bodies than they ever do actually sustain. Thus the matter is never brought to a penetration of dimensions or to a vacuum, except in the extreme limits of condensation and rarefaction, whereas the motions of which I speak stop far short of these limits, and are nothing more than desires which bodies have for preserving themselves in their consistencies, or, if the schoolmen like, in their forms, and not suddenly departing therefrom, unless they be altered by gentle means, and with consent. But it is far more necessary, because much depends upon it, that men should know that violent motion, which we call mechanical, but which Democritus, who in expounding his primary motions is to be ranked even below second-rate philosophers, called motion of stripe, is nothing more than this motion of liberty, that is, of escape from compression to relaxation. For either in a mere thrust, or in flight through the air, there occurs no movement or change of place until the parts of the body moved are acted upon and compressed by the impelling body more than their nature will bear. Then, indeed, when each part pushes against the next, one after the other, the whole is moved. And it not only moves forward, but revolves at the same time, the parts seeking in that way also to free themselves, or to distribute the pressure more equally. And so much for this motion. Let the fourth motion be that to which I have given the name of the motion of matter, which is in some sort the converse of the last named motion. For in the motion of liberty bodies dread, loathe, and shun a new dimension, or a new sphere, or a new expansion or contraction, which are all names for the same thing, and strive with all their might to recoil, and recover their old consistency. On the contrary, in this motion of matter, bodies desire a new sphere or dimension, and aspire thereto readily and quickly, and sometimes, as in the case of gunpowder, with most violent effort. Now the instruments of this motion, not indeed the sole, but the most potent, or at any rate the most common, are heat and cold. For instance, air, if expanded by tension, as by suction in glass eggs, labours under a strong desire to recover itself. But if heat be applied, it longs, on the contrary, to expand, and desires a new sphere, and passes into it readily as into a new form. So they phrase it. And after a certain degree of expansion, cares not to return, unless invited thereto by the application of cold, which is not a return, but a renewed transmutation. In the same way water, if made to contract by pressure, resists and wishes to become such as it was, that is, larger. But if there intervene intense and continued cold, it changes itself spontaneously and gladly to the density of ice. And if the cold be continued long, without interruption from heat, as in grottoes and caverns of some depth, it turns to crystal or some similar material and never recovers its form. Let the fifth motion be the motion of continuity, by which I do not mean simple and primary continuity with some other body, for that is the motion of connexion, but self-continuity in a given body. For it is most certain that all bodies dread a solution of continuity, some more, some less, but all to a certain extent. For while in hard bodies, as steel or glass, resistance to discontinuity is exceedingly strong, even in liquids, where it seems to disappear, or at all events to be very feeble, it is not altogether absent, but is certainly there, though in its lowest degree of power, and betrays itself in very many experiments as in bubbles, in the roundness of drops, in the thin threads of droppings from roofs, in the tenacity of glutinous bodies, and the like. But most of all does this appetite display itself, if an attempt be made to extend the discontinuity to minute fragments. For in a mortar, after a certain amount of pulverization, the pestle produces no further effect. Water does not penetrate into minute chinks. Even air itself, notwithstanding its subtlety, does not suddenly pass through the pores of solid vessels, but only after long insinuation. Let the sixth motion be that which I call motion for a gain, or motion of want. It is that by which bodies, when placed among quite heterogeneous and hostile bodies, if they find an opportunity of escaping from these and uniting themselves to others more cognate, though these others be such as have no close union with them, do nevertheless embrace the latter and choose them as preferable, and seem to view this connexion in the light of a gam, whence the term, as though they stood in need of such bodies. For instance, gold or any other metal in the leaf does not like the surrounding air. If therefore it meet with any thick tangible body, as a finger, paper, what you will, it instantly sticks to it, and is not easily torn away. So too paper, cloth, and the like do not agree well with the air, which is lodged in their pores. They are therefore glad to imbibe water or other moisture and eject the air. A piece of sugar too, or a sponge, if dipped at one end in water or wine, while the other stands out far above the surface, draws the water or the wine gradually upward. Hence we derive an excellent rule for opening and dissolving bodies. For, to say nothing of corrosives and strong waters, which open for themselves a way, if there can be found a body proportioned to and more in harmony and affinity with a given solid body than that with which it is of a necessity mixed, the solid body immediately opens and relaxes itself, and shutting out or ejecting the latter, receives the former into itself. Nor does this motion for gain act or exist only in immediate contact. For electricity, of which Gilbert and others after him have devised such stories, is nothing else than the appetite of a body when excited by gentle friction, an appetite which does not well endure the air but prefers some other tangible body, if it be found near at hand. Let the seventh motion be what I call the motion of the greater congregation, by which bodies are carried toward masses of a like nature with themselves. Heavy bodies to the globe of the earth, light to the compass of the heaven. This the schoolmen have denoted by the name of natural motion from superficial considerations, either because there was nothing conspicuous externally which could produce such motion, and therefore they supposed it to be innate and inherent in things themselves, or perhaps because it never ceases. And no wonder, for the earth and heaven are ever there, whereas the causes and origins of most other motions are sometimes absent, sometimes present. Accordingly this motion, because it ceases not but when others cease, is felt instantly, they deem perpetual and proper, all others adcititious. This motion, however, in point of fact, is sufficiently weak and dull, being one which, except in bodies of considerable bulk, yields and succumbs to all other motions, as long as they are in operation. And though this motion has so filled men's thoughts as to have put all others almost out of sight, yet it is but little that they know about it, being involved in many errors with regard to it. Let the eighth motion be the motion of the lesser congregation, by which the homogeneous parts in a body separate themselves from the heterogeneous, and combine together; by which also entire bodies from similarity of substance embrace and cherish each other, and sometimes are attracted and collected together from a considerable distance; as when in milk, after it has stood a while, the cream rises to the top, while in wine the dregs sink to the bottom. For this is not caused by the motion of heaviness and lightness only, whereby some parts rise up, and some sink down, but much more by a desire of the homogeneous parts to come together and unite in one. Now this motion differs from the motion of want in 2 points. One is that in the latter there is the stronger stimulus of a malignant and contrary nature, whereas in this motion, provided there be nothing to hinder or fetter it, the parts unite from friendship, even in the absence of a foreign nature to stir up strife. The other point is that the union is here closer and, as it were, with greater choice. In the former, if only the hostile body be avoided, bodies not closely related come together; whereas in the latter, substances are drawn together by the tie of close relationship, and, as it were, combine into one. And this motion resides in all composite bodies, and would readily show itself, were it not bound and restrained by other appetites and necessities in the bodies which interfere with the union in question. Now the binding of this motion takes place generally in 3 ways: by the torpor of bodies, by the check of a dominant body, and by external motions. Now, for the torpor of bodies, it is certain that there resides in tangible substances a certain sluggishness, more or less, and an aversion from change of place, insomuch that, unless they be excited, they had rather remain as they are than change for the better. Now this torpor is shaken off by the help of 3 things, either by heat, or by the eminent virtue of some cognate body, or by lively and powerful motion. And as for the help of heat, it is for this reason that heat has been denned to be that which separates heterogeneous and congregates homogeneous parts. A definition of the Peripatetics justly derided by Gilbert, who says, it is much the same as if a man were to be denned as that which sows wheat and plants vines. For that it is a definition simply by effects, and those particular. But the definition has a worse fault, inasmuch as these effects, such as they are, arise not from a peculiar property of heat, but only indirectly. For cold does the same, as I shall afterwards show, being caused by the desire of homogeneous parts to unite; heat simply aiding to shake off the torpor which had previously bound the desire. As for the help derived from the virtue of a cognate body, it is well seen in an armed magnet which excites in iron the virtue of detaining iron by similarity of substance, the torpor of the iron being cast off by virtue of the magnet. And as for help derived from motion, it is shown in wooden arrows, having their points also of wood, which penetrate more deeply into wood than if they were tipped with steel, owing to the similarity of substance, the torpor of the wood being shaken off by the rapid motion. Of these 2 experiments I have spoken also in the Aphorism on clandestine instances. That binding of the motion of the lesser congregation which is caused by the restraint of a dominant body is seen in the resolution of blood and urine by cold. For as long as those bodies are filled with the active spirit which, as Lord of the whole, orders and restrains the several parts of whatsoever sort, so long the homogeneous parts do not meet together on account of the restraint. But as soon as the spirit has evaporated, or been choked by cold, then the parts being freed from restraint meet together in accordance with their natural desire. And thus it happens that all bodies which contain an eager spirit, as salts and the like, remain as they are, and are not resolved, owing to the permanent and durable restraint of a dominant and commanding spirit. That binding of the motion of lesser congregation, which is caused by external motion, is most conspicuous in the shaking of bodies to prevent putrefaction. For all putrefaction depends on the assembling together of homogeneous parts, whence there gradually ensues the corruption of the old form, as they call it, and the generation of a new. For putrefaction, which paves the way for the generation of a new form, is preceded by a dissolution of the old, which is itself a meeting together of homogeneous parts. That, indeed, if not impeded, is simple resolution. But if it be met by various obstacles, there follows putrefactions, which are the rudiments of a new generation. But if, which is the present question, a frequent agitation be kept up by external motion, then indeed this motion of uniting, which is a delicate and tender one, and requires rest from things without, is disturbed and ceases, as we see happen in numberless instances. For example, the daily stirring or flowing of water prevents it from putrefying. Winds keep off pestilence in the air. Corn turned and shaken in the granary remains pure. All things, in short, that are shaken outwardly are slower to putrefy inwardly. Lastly, I must not omit that meaning of the parts of bodies, which is the chief cause of induration and desiccation. For when the spirit, or moisture turned to spirit, has escaped from some porous body, as wood, bone, parchment, and the like, then the grosser parts are with stronger effort drawn, and collected together, whence ensues induration, or desiccation, which I take to be owing not so much to the motion of connection to prevent a vacuum, as to this motion of friendship and union. As for the meeting of bodies from a distance, this is a rare occurrence, and yet it exists in more cases than are generally observed. We have illustrations of it when bubble dissolves bubble, when medicines draw humours by similarity of substance, when the chord of one violin makes the chord of another sound a unison, and the like. I suspect also that this motion prevails in the spirits of animals, though it be altogether unknown. At any rate, it exists conspicuously in the magnet and magnetized iron. And now that we are speaking of the motions of the magnet, they ought to be carefully distinguished. For these are four virtues or operations in the magnet which should not be confounded, but kept apart, although the wonder and admiration of men have mixed them up together. The first is the attraction of magnet to magnet, or of iron to magnet, or of magnetized iron to iron. The second is its polarity, and at the same time its declination. The third, its power of penetrating through gold, glass, stone, everything. The fourth, its power of communicating its virtue from stone to iron, and from iron to iron, without communication of substance. In this place, however, I am speaking only of the first of these virtues, that is, its attractive power. Remarkable also is the motion of attraction between quicksilver and gold, insomuch that gold attracts quicksilver, though made up into ointments. And men who work amid the vapours of quicksilver usually hold a piece of gold in their mouths, to collect the exhalations which would otherwise penetrate into their skulls and bones, by which also the piece of gold is presently turned white. And so much for the motion of the lesser congregation. Let the ninth motion be the magnetic, which, though it be of the same genus with the motion of the lesser congregation, yet if it operates at great distances and on large masses, deserves a separate investigation, especially if it begin not with contact, as most, nor lead to contact, as all motions of congregation do, but simply raises bodies or makes them swell, and nothing more. For if the moon raises the waters, or makes moist things swell, if the starry heaven attracts planets to their apogees, if the sun holds Venus and Mercury, so that their elongations never exceed a certain distance, these motions seem to fall properly neither under the greater nor the lesser congregation, but to be of a sort of intermediate and imperfect congregation, and therefore ought to constitute a species by themselves. Let the 10th motion be that of flight, a motion the exact opposite of that of the lesser congregation, by which bodies from antipathy flee from and put to flight hostile bodies, and separate themselves from them, or refuse to mingle with them. For although in some cases this motion may seem to be an accident, or a consequence of the motion of the lesser congregation, because the homogeneous parts cannot meet without dislodging and ejecting the heterogeneous, still it is a motion that should be classed by itself and formed into a distinct species, because in many cases the appetite of flight is seen to be more dominant than the appetite of union. This motion is eminently conspicuous in the excretions of animals, and not less in objects odious to some of the senses, especially the smell and the taste. For a fetid odour is so rejected by the sense of smell as to induce by consent in the mouth of the stomach a motion of expulsion. A rough and bitter taste is so rejected by the palate or throat as to induce by consent a shaking of the head and a shudder. But this motion has place in other things also. It is observed in certain forms of reaction, as in the middle region of the air, where the cold seems to be the effect of the rejection of the nature of cold from the confines of the heavenly bodies. As also the great heats and burnings which are found in subterranean places appear to be rejections of the nature of heat from the inner parts of the earth. For heat and cold, in small quantities, kill one another, but if they be in large masses, as it were in regular armies, the result of the conflict is that they displace and eject each other in turn. It is also said that cinnamon and other perfumes retain their scent longer when placed near sinks and foul-smelling places, because they refuse to come out and mingle with stenches. It is certain that quicksilver, which of itself would reunite into an entire mass, is kept from doing so by spittle, hog's lard, turpentine, and the like, owing to the ill consent which its parts have with such bodies, from which, when spread around them, they draw back, so that their desire to fly from these intervening bodies is more powerful than their desire of uniting with parts like themselves. And this is called the mortification of quicksilver. The fact also that oil does not mix with water is not simply owing to the difference of weight, but to the ill consent of these fluids, as may be seen from the fact that spirit of wine, though lighter than oil, yet mixes well enough with water. But most of all is the motion of flight conspicuous in nitre, and such like crude bodies, which abhor flame, as in gunpowder, quicksilver, and gold. But the flight of iron from one pole of the magnet is well observed by Gilbert to be not a flight strictly speaking, but a conformity, and meeting in a more convenient situation. Let the 11th motion be that of assimilation, or of self-multiplication, or again of simple generation, by which I mean not the generation of integral bodies, as plants or animals, but of bodies of uniform texture. That is to say, by this motion such bodies convert others which are related, or at any rate well disposed to them, into their own substance and nature. Thus flame over vapours and oily substances multiplies itself and generates new flame. Air over water and watery substances multiplies itself and generates new air. Spirit, vegetable and animal, over the finer parts as well of watery as of oily substance in its food, multiplies itself and generates new spirit. The solid parts of plants and animals, as the leaf, flower, flesh, bone, and the like, severally assimilate new substances to follow and supply what is lost out of the juices of their food. For let no one adopt the wild fancy of Paracelsus, who, blinded I suppose by his distillations, will have it that nutrition is caused only by separation. and that in bread and meat lie eye, nose, brain, liver, in the moisture of the ground, root, leaf, and flower. For as the artist out of the rude mass of stone or wood educes, by separation and rejection of what is superfluous, leaf, flower, eye, nose, hand, foot, and the like, so he maintains, does Archaeus, the internal artist, educe out of food by separation and rejection the several members and parts of our body. But to leave such trifles, it is most certain that the several parts, as well similar as organic, in vegetables and animals, do first attract with some degree of selection the juices of their food, which are alike or nearly so for all, and then assimilate them, and turn them into their own nature. Nor does this assimilation or simple generation take place only in animate bodies, but inanimate also participate therein, as has been stated of flame and air. Moreover, the non-vital spirit, which is contained in every tangible animated substance, is constantly at work to digest the coarser parts and turn them into spirit, to be afterwards discharged, whence ensues diminution of weight and desiccation, as I have stated elsewhere. Nor must we set apart from assimilation that accretion which is commonly distinguished from alimentation, as when clay between stones concretes and turns into a stony substance, or the scaly substance on the teeth turns into a substance as hard as the teeth themselves, and so on. For I am of the opinion that there resides in all bodies a desire for assimilation as well as for uniting with homogeneous substances, but this virtue is bound, as is the other, though not by the same means. But these means, as well as the way of escape from them, ought to be investigated with all diligence, because they pertain to the rekindling of the vital power in old age. Lastly, it seems worthy of observation that in the 9 motions of which I have spoken, footnote 1, which relate to concrete bodies rather than to matter in general, end of footnote, bodies seem to desire only the preservation of their nature, but in this 10th the propagation of it. Let the 12th motion be that of excitation, a motion which seems to belong to the genus of assimilation, and which I sometimes call by that name. For it is a motion diffusive, communicative, transitive, and multiplicative, as is the other, and agreeing with it generally in effect, though differing in the mode of effecting and in the subject matter. For the motion of assimilation proceeds, as it were, with authority and command. It orders and forces the assimilated body to turn into the assimilating. But the motion of excitation proceeds, so to speak, with art and by insinuation, and stealthily, simply inviting and disposing the excited body to the nature of the exciting. Again, the motion of assimilation multiplies and transforms bodies and substances. Thus more flame is produced, more air, more spirit, more flesh. But in the motion of excitation, virtues only are multiplied and transferred. More heat being engendered, more magnetic power, more putrefying. This motion is particularly conspicuous in heat and cold, for heat does not diffuse itself, in heating a body, by communicating of the original heat, but simply by exciting the parts of the body to that motion which is the form of heat, of which I have spoken in the first vintage concerning the nature of heat. Consequently, heat is excited far more slowly and with far greater difficulty in stone or metal than in air, owing to the unfitness and unreadiness of those bodies to receive this motion. So that it is probable that there may exist materials in the bowels of the earth which altogether refuse to be heated, because through their greater condensation they are destitute of that spirit with which this motion of excitation generally begins. In like manner the magnet endues iron with a new disposition of its parts and a conformable motion, but loses nothing of its own virtue. Similarly leaven, yeast, curd, and certain poisons excite and invite a successive and continued motion in dough, beer, cheese, or the human body, not so much by the force of the exciting as by the predisposition and easy yielding of the excited body. End of Aphorism 48, Part 1 of Book 2. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards.